specific cuts or tax increases? You want to reinstate tariffs, I know, so that would bring in revenue.
The thing I find interesting, before we get to the question of specific cuts, let's deal with the real source of the problem, why don't we? And the real source of the problem is, first, a morally irresponsible attitude toward the burden that we're placing on future generations, both in the actual deficit of the federal government, in the unfunded liabilities that are being passed on to future generations, in the Medicare and Social Security programs. These are things that I believe we have a responsibility to deal with. How do we deal with them? It's really first that you've got to tackle what I believe is the major problem. When I was at Citizens Against Government Waste as president, we championed a balanced budget approach, a taxpayer bill of rights that would require that the government stay within the limits of inflation and population growth, and that when the government's budget expanded, it would respect those limits and make the necessary cuts and adjustments in order to stay within those limits. But in order to do that, you're going to have to change the whole Christmas tree approach to politics that sadly is represented by many of our politicians, particularly those of the liberal persuasion, who want to hang the Christmas tree ornaments of gimme politics, whether it's for corporations or others, on the tree of government budgeting. I think we've got to realize that a different approach is required. An approach that will encourage people to take back control of their families, of their schools, of their lives, of their sense of responsibility. It's one of the reasons I favor abolishing the income tax and giving people, once again, control of their surplus income so they can invest it and decide what to do with it. The dollars that the government spends do not produce the kind of economic results that the dollars spent in the private sector can produce. That's why folks who think, well, we'll fund this with tax cuts are doing it the wrong way around. With tax increases, are doing it the wrong way around. When we saw the tax cuts of the Reagan years, do you realize we had the greatest expansion in the revenue base that we've seen in the history of the country? In every year of the Reagan tax cuts, more revenue was produced than in any year before in our history.
Are there specific spending cuts you'd make?
We need to get back to the fundamentals in order to stop the whole approach to politics that produces the expansion of the deficit by trying to fund the re-election of politicians through pork barrel spending. And I think that when we address the root problem, we won't have to bicker in this class warfare way over who's paying for what, because we will have returned to an approach to government that keeps our politicians within the boundaries of responsibility.
Ambassador Keyes, this is we have to move on, and we have very little time in which to do it. But you have accused your opponent of infanticide. He says you don't understand what that vote was about. You have to be very brief on this, though, but explain what it is you mean when you say he has voted for infanticide.
Well, I think it's very clear. The Born Alive Infant Protection Act that was aimed at making sure that children born alive after an abortion procedure would not be set aside to die like garbage. When babies at exactly the same stage of development are being assessed and then saved right down the hall in the same hospitals where they are boasting about their ability to save preemies, I think that we have to take seriously the testimony of people like Jill Stanek and others and not pretend that this problem does not exist. There was a bipartisan vote in support of the need to stop this in the Illinois Senate, so a lot of people heard and were moved by that cogent testimony instead of extending the mentality of so-called abortion rights to the business of taking fully born babies. Now, everybody should understand this. This isn't a child in the womb. A fully born human infant for whom a birth certificate will be issued and a death certificate will be issued. And in between those two issuances, the child is not being treated with the same respect that you or I would demand for our right to life. And I think that's a travesty. The senator ignored that travesty not once, not twice, but 3 times on the plea now, I suppose, that this problem does not exist. I guess he's calling the nurses involved liars.
Senator Obama.
Well, this is apparently the entire basis on which Ambassador Keyes decided to contradict himself with respect to his views about federalism and not carpetbagging and not running in other states. According to Ambassador Keyes, this was the reason, this bill. And unfortunately, it's premised on a falsehood. And if Ambassador Keyes had called me up, he could have saved himself a trip. Because existing Illinois law mandates that any infant that has a chance for survival is provided life-saving treatment. Not only that, you've got to have a second doctor there to certify that, in fact, that is the case. That continues to be the case. That is current law today, as it should be. Now, the bill that was put forward was essentially a way of getting around Roe versus Wade, which is why 21 other senators, Democrat and Republican, why the Illinois Medical Society objected to the bill. At the federal level, there was a similar bill that passed because it had an amendment saying this does not encroach on Roe versus Wade. I would have voted for that bill.
I find it fascinating.
We really are out of time if you want to have time to make your closing statement.
So, gentlemen, you've each got about a minute. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Tell the people why they should vote for you.
Well, I think the most important reason is that we have to start looking at the root problems that are besetting our society. And the root problem is clear. When you examine what contributes to the failures of our educational system, when you examine what is contributing to the rise in poverty, when you examine, as I was reading a paper the other day, but produced by that was given me by the Metropolitan Planning Council, they examined the affordable housing gap, and you know what they found? They found that the change in family structure, the move to single-parent households, the decline of our family structure was the main contributing factor to the lack of affordable housing. Now, the problem here is not simply a problem you can throw money at. We have got to deal with the underlying fact that we have been destroying the moral culture of the family, hardening the heart of parents against their children with abortion, with the wholesale assault against the traditional family, traditional marriage that Barack Obama does not want to defend. He refuses to support the Family Marriage Amendment. He refuses to support the Defense of Marriage Act. But if we are not willing to restore our respect for the moral values that underlie our families, as the family fails, America will fail. I think we need to get to that root problem and restructure our approach in all these areas in order to address the moral crisis of the country.
Barack Obama, why should people vote for you?
Well, I'm very proud of the track record that I've developed as a community organizer with church-based organizations in the far South Side helping dislocated workers, as a civil rights attorney, and for the last 8 years as a state senator. In each of those instances, I've been motivated by a belief that government can't solve all our problems, but that it can help in terms of dealing with the crushing burdens that many of our middle-class families are experiencing. You know, as I've traveled across the state for the last 18 months, what people are worried about is whether an illness in their family is going to cause them to go bankrupt. They're concerned about whether the job that they have right now is going to stay here and whether their pensions are going to be secure. Senior citizens are concerned about whether or not they're going to have prescription medicine. In each of those instances, I have specific programs that I've proposed, but more than just talking the talk, I've walked the walk. Over the last 8 years, I can point to specific accomplishments that will actually help ordinary working families, and I hope that those voters look at that record.
Gentlemen, thank you. That concludes the debate between Republican Alan Keyes and Democrat Barack Obama for the U.S. Senate race on the Illinois Radio Network. For Mike Flannery of CBS 2 Chicago and Jim Anderson of IRN, I'm News Radio 780's Craig Dellamore, and we thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Get this stuff out fast.